Welcome back to Too Lazy to Read. We're diving into a book today that's been making waves, Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck.
It's funny, the title might sound a little provocative, but it's really about cutting through the noise and figuring out what truly matters in life.
Right, it's like he's giving us permission to let go of all those things we're supposed to care about and focus on what actually brings us joy and fulfillment.
Exactly. And I think that's why it resonates so much with young people today. There's so much pressure to be successful, have the perfect Instagram feed, the whole 9 yards.
Totally. And Manson's like, hey, it's okay to not have it all figured out. In fact, embracing our imperfections and struggles can actually be the key to living a more authentic and meaningful life.
Absolutely. And he kicks things off in chapter 1, Don't Try, with this great story about Charles Bukowski, the poet.
Now, Bukowski was a bit of a character, to say the least.
He was definitely not your typical self-help guru. Bukowski was known for his hard living, his, shall we say, unconventional lifestyle.
But instead of trying to hide his flaws, he embraced them. He put it all out there in his writing, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
And that raw honesty, that vulnerability is what made him so relatable and ultimately so successful.
It's like he was saying, this is who I am, take it or leave it.
And people loved him for it.
Because it was real. It was refreshing in a world that often feels so fake and superficial.
And that's one of Manson's main points. Trying to force ourselves to be happy all the time, to deny our negative emotions, actually backfires.
Right, it's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. The more you push it down, the harder it's going to pop back up.
Exactly. And Manson calls this the backwards law. The more you chase happiness, the more it eludes you.
So are you saying we should just give up on trying to be happy?
Not at all. It's about shifting our focus. Instead of trying to avoid negative emotions, we need to learn to accept them as part of the human experience.
So it's like, instead of saying, I shouldn't feel sad, it's more about saying, okay, I'm feeling sad right now. What can I learn from this feeling? What can I do to take care of myself in this moment?
Exactly. It's about acknowledging our emotions without judgment and letting ourselves feel them fully.
This makes me think about how we often chase after things like wealth, status, or even relationships, thinking they're going to be the magic key to happiness.
And sometimes those things can bring us joy, but they're not a substitute for dealing with our internal stuff.
Right. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. It might cover up the problem temporarily, but it's not going to address the underlying issue.
And that's what Manson dives into in chapter 2, Happiness is a Problem.
I love the title of that chapter. It's so counterintuitive.
Right. But he introduces this hilarious character, the disappointment panda, who basically tells us all the hard truths we don't want to hear.
It's like that friend who's brutally honest with you, even if it stings a little.
And one of the big messages the disappointment panda delivers is that struggle is actually essential for happiness.
Wait, so you're saying we need to suffer to be happy?
Not necessarily suffer, but definitely struggle. It's through overcoming challenges, learning from our mistakes, and pushing ourselves outside our comfort zones that we grow and evolve as human beings.
So it's like, if everything in life was always easy and we never had to face any adversity, we wouldn't really appreciate the good times as much.
Exactly.
And we wouldn't develop the resilience and grit that are so essential for navigating the ups and downs of life.
Manson uses this great story about a prince who had everything you could possibly want: wealth, luxury, entertainment, but felt completely empty inside.
He had it all, but he wasn't happy.
He tried everything to find fulfillment, indulging in pleasure, seeking wisdom, even subjecting himself to physical pain. But nothing worked.
Because he was looking for happiness in all the wrong places.
He was trying to find it outside of himself instead of realizing that true happiness comes from within.
It's like that saying, wherever you go, there you are.
Exactly. You can't run away from your problems. You have to face them head on.
So for our listeners who might be struggling with, let's say, a dead-end job or a difficult relationship, what's the takeaway here?
It's about reframing your perspective. Instead of focusing on what you lack, focus on what you can control. What steps can you take, even small ones, to move toward a more fulfilling future?
It's about taking ownership of your life, even if your circumstances aren't ideal.
And it's about recognizing that struggle is a natural part of the growth process.
It's not something to be feared, but rather embraced as an opportunity to learn and evolve.
And this leads perfectly into chapter 3, You Are Not Special.
I feel like that's a bit of a tough love message, but I get it.
It is, but it's also incredibly liberating. Manson argues that this whole self-esteem movement, this constant message of you're amazing, you can do anything, can actually be detrimental.
I can see how that could set people up for disappointment,
Yeah.
especially in today's world of social media, where everyone is presenting this curated version of themselves.
Exactly. It creates this pressure to be perfect, to achieve some unattainable standard of success and happiness.
And when we inevitably fall short, it can be really discouraging.
So Manson's like, hey, let's get real here. Most of us are average at most things.
And that's perfectly okay.
In fact, it's the starting point for growth.
It's like once you accept that you're not special, you can actually start focusing on becoming better.
Exactly.
It's about having a realistic starting point and then putting in the work to improve.
And this ties in perfectly with Chapter 4, The Value of Suffering. Manson shares this incredible story about Hiru Onoda, a Japanese soldier who continued fighting World War II for almost 30 years after it ended.
Wait, what? How is that even possible?
Onoda was stationed on this remote island in the Philippines, and he was given very strict orders to never surrender.
So even when Japan surrendered in 1935, he didn't believe it.
He thought it was enemy propaganda.
So he stayed hidden in the jungle, surviving on whatever he could find for decades.
Can you imagine the dedication, the resilience?
Yeah, but also the misplaced effort. He was fighting a war that was already over.
And that's Manson's point. Onoda's story is a powerful example of how choosing the wrong values can lead to a life of wasted effort and unnecessary suffering.
So how do we avoid becoming like Onoda? How do we make sure we're not dedicating our lives to pointless pursuits?
By regularly evaluating our values, asking ourselves, are these values truly serving me? Are they leading me toward a life that I want to live?
So it's like taking inventory of our beliefs and behaviors and deciding what to keep and what to toss.
Exactly. And sometimes that can be a painful process. It might mean letting go of things that we've held on to for a long time, even if they're no longer serving us.
But it's essential for making sure we're not running on a treadmill, putting in a lot of effort, but going nowhere.
And that brings us to Chapter 5, You Are Always Choosing, where Manson dives into the concepts of fault and responsibility.
So what's the difference?
Well, fault is about blame. It's about who's to blame for a particular situation. Responsibility, on the other hand, is about ownership. It's about taking ownership of your choices and actions, even if you weren't necessarily at fault for the situation you're in.
So you might not be at fault for, say, being laid off from your job, but you are responsible for how you choose to respond to that situation.
Exactly. Manson uses this great analogy of finding a baby on your doorstep. You didn't put the baby there, it's not your fault. But now it's your responsibility to decide what to do. You can't just ignore it and hope it goes away.
That's a pretty powerful image.
It's a metaphor for how we often blame external circumstances or other people for our unhappiness. But the truth is, we always have a choice in how we react, how we interpret events, and what we do next.
It's like that saying, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional.
Exactly. We can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond to it. It's like we get attached to this idea of being right, even when the evidence might be pointing us in a different direction.
Yeah, it's like our ego gets in the way.
Exactly, and that's something Manson digs into in Chapter 6. You're wrong about everything, but so am I.
Okay, so right off the bat, he's calling all of us out.
He is, but he does it in a way that's actually really funny and insightful.
Like, how so?
Well, he starts off with some examples of how beliefs have changed over time.
Oh, I see. Like how people used to think the earth was flat.
Exactly. Or how they believe that diseases were caused by evil spirits.
Those ideas seem ridiculous to us now, but they were considered facts back then.
Right. And it makes you wonder, what beliefs do we hold today that future generations will look back on and shake their heads at?
It's a humbling thought, for sure.
And that's Manson's point. Our understanding of the world is constantly evolving. What we believe to be true today might be proven wrong tomorrow.
So how do we stay open to new information and avoid getting stuck in our old ways of thinking?
Well, Manson talks about this thing called confirmation bias, which is basically our tendency to seek out information that confirms our existing beliefs while ignoring evidence that contradicts them.
So it's like if you're a diehard fan of a certain sports team, you're more likely to notice the calls that go in their favor and kind of gloss over the ones that don't.
Exactly. Or if you have a strong political opinion, you might only read news articles that support your view.
It's like we're creating these echo chambers for ourselves.
Right. And that can be really dangerous, especially in today's world where we're bombarded with information from all sides.
It's more important than ever to be critical thinkers, to question our assumptions, and to be willing to change our minds when presented with new evidence.
Now, one of the most extreme examples of how our beliefs can shape our reality is this story that Manson shares about a woman named Meredith.
Oh, yeah, I remember this one. She developed false memories of abuse through suggestive therapy.
Right, and it's a really chilling example of how our minds can be manipulated, especially when we're in a vulnerable state.
It makes you realize how powerful our beliefs can be, even if they're not based in reality.
And it highlights the importance of seeking out credible sources of information and being cautious of anyone who claims to have all the answers.
Because the truth is, none of us have all the answers.
We're all just trying to figure things out as we go along.
And that's okay. It's part of being human.
And speaking of figuring things out, Manson really challenges our definition of success and failure in Chapter 7. Failure is the way forward.
I love that he reframes failure as a positive thing.
He argues that it's not something to be feared, but rather an essential part of the learning process.
It's like that saying, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs.
Exactly. You have to be willing to mess up, to experiment, to take risks if you want to achieve anything worthwhile.
And he tells this great story about Pablo Picasso being approached by a woman in a cafe who wanted to buy a napkin he had doodled on.
Oh, yeah, and Picasso agreed to sell it, but for a ridiculous price, like $20,000 or something.
The woman was shocked and said something like, "But it only took you a few minutes to draw that."
And Picasso replied, "No, it took me over 60 years to draw that."
That's such a great comeback.
Yeah.
It really highlights the point that mastery takes time and effort and a lot of trial and error.
It's not about being perfect. It's about being persistent and learning from your mistakes.
And I think that's a really encouraging message for anyone who's feeling discouraged about their progress or lack thereof.
It's a reminder that success is not a linear path. It's full of twists and turns and setbacks.
And it's often in those moments of failure that we learn the most valuable lessons.
Now, Manson also makes an interesting distinction between goal-oriented values and process-oriented values.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that.
So, goal-oriented values are all about achieving a specific outcome, like getting a promotion, buying a house, or losing weight.
And those are all good things.
Yeah, they can be, but the problem is that once you achieve the goal, the motivation often disappears.
It's like climbing a mountain. Once you reach the summit, there's nowhere else to go but down.
Exactly, and that can lead to a feeling of emptiness or a sense of, now what?
So what's the alternative?
Process-oriented values. These are about continuous improvement and growth. They're ongoing journeys with no fixed endpoint.
Can you give some examples?
Sure, things like learning a new language, mastering a musical instrument, or developing a skill.
So it's not about the destination, it's about the journey.
Exactly, and Manson argues that process-oriented values are more likely to lead to long-term fulfillment and happiness because they provide a sense of purpose and direction, regardless of whether you achieve specific milestones or accolades.
It's like you're always striving to be better, to learn more, to grow as a person.
Right. And that's a much more sustainable and rewarding way to live than constantly chasing after external goals.
This reminds me of Manson's own story about quitting his job to pursue online business.
It was a risky move, but he was driven by his passion for entrepreneurship and his desire to create something of his own.
And it definitely wasn't easy. He faced plenty of challenges and setbacks along the way.
But he persevered and ultimately achieved success on his own terms.
And that's a great example of the do something principle, which is another key concept in the book.
Right. Manson argues that action can actually be the cause of motivation, not just the result.
So instead of waiting for inspiration to strike, just start doing something.
Exactly. Even if it's something small, just take a step in the direction of your goals.
It's like that saying, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
And once you start taking action, you'll often find that the motivation follows.
It's like you create your own momentum.
Now, taking action also means learning to set boundaries and being willing to say no, which is what Manson explores in Chapter 8, the importance of saying no.
It's something a lot of people struggle with, especially those who are people pleasers.
It can be really hard to say no, especially to people we care about.
But Manson argues that it's essential for protecting our time, energy, and emotional well-being.
We can't be everything to everyone, and we need to prioritize our own needs and values, even if it means disappointing others.
It's about setting healthy boundaries and learning to say no without feeling guilty.
And he starts off this chapter with this funny anecdote about his travels in Russia.
Oh yeah, where he was struck by how blunt and direct people were.
Right, they said what they meant, even if it was uncomfortable.
There was no sugarcoating or beating around the bush.
And while this directness was initially jarring to Manson, he actually came to appreciate it.
It was refreshing to be around people who weren't afraid to express themselves honestly.
Exactly, and it freed him from the pressure of trying to please everyone and worrying about being judged.
So it's about being authentic and true to yourself, even if it means ruffling some feathers.
And this leads to a broader point about the importance of boundaries in all relationships.
So it's not just about saying no to requests or invitations. It's about setting boundaries in all areas of our lives.
Right, whether it's with our friends, family, or significant others.
Healthy relationships are built on mutual respect, trust, and the ability to communicate our needs effectively.
And that includes being able to say no when necessary.
Now, Manson also cautions against falling into the trap of victim and savior dynamics in relationships.
Right, these are roles that people can get stuck in, where one person plays the victim and the other plays the savior.
So the victim is constantly complaining about their problems and looking for someone to rescue them.
And the savior gets a sense of self-worth from fixing other people's problems.
It might seem like a complementary dynamic, but it's actually really unhealthy.
Both parties are avoiding taking responsibility for their own issues.
And they're perpetuating a cycle of dependency.
Manson argues that healthy relationships are built on two individuals who are capable of solving their own problems while providing support and encouragement to each other.
It's about finding someone who complements you, not completes you.
And that requires setting boundaries, being honest about your needs, and being willing to say no when necessary.
It's about finding a balance between being there for each other and taking responsibility for our own lives.
And that leads us to the final chapter of the book, And Then You Die, which is perhaps the most profound and thought-provoking of them all. It's a powerful reminder that our time on this earth is finite and that we shouldn't waste it on things that don't truly matter.
It's like he's saying that by acknowledging our mortality, we can actually live more fully and meaningfully.
Exactly. It's not about denying death or trying to escape it. It's about embracing it as an integral part of life.
He actually uses this really vivid analogy to illustrate this point. It's about standing on the edge of a cliff in South Africa.
He talks about feeling this intense fear and anxiety as he inched closer to the edge, but also this incredible sense of liberation and clarity that washed over him when he confronted his fear.
It's like that moment when you realize that the things we often fear the most are actually the things that are holding us back from truly living.
And that's really the essence of the subtle art of not giving effect. It's about letting go of those fears, those limiting beliefs, those things that are draining our energy and preventing us from pursuing what truly matters.
So it's not just about not caring, it's about choosing what to care about.
Exactly. It's about being selective with our energy and attention.
It's about choosing our values consciously and then having the courage to live in alignment with them, even if it means going against the grain or facing discomfort.
And accepting that life is going to be messy and unpredictable.
That's okay.
In fact, it's in those moments of difficulty and discomfort that we often find the greatest opportunities for growth and transformation.
So much of what we talked about today really challenges conventional self-help wisdom.
It does. It's not about chasing some elusive state of constant happiness.
For our listeners who are maybe feeling overwhelmed by the pressure to be happy and successful all the time, what's the key takeaway?
I'd say give yourself permission to not give a feck about the things that don't truly matter to you. Focus your energy on what does your values, your passions, your relationships, and have the courage to pursue them authentically, even if it means making mistakes along the way.
It's about embracing the whole human experience, the good, the bad, and the messy, and finding meaning in the midst of it all. If you're ready to ditch the self-help cliches and embrace a more realistic and empowering approach to life, definitely check out The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck.
It might just change the way you see the world.
And be sure to follow Too Lazy to Read for more deep dives into books that can help you navigate life's complexities and create a more fulfilling future.
Until next time, happy reading.